I'm going to redo that. Hold on,
Go ahead.
everybody. Hey, welcome everyone to Stop LAPD Spying's webinar series. My name's Jamie. I'm a coalition member and coordinating team member. I help to facilitate the data-driven working groups. So this fourth Tuesday, we usually meet and the data-driven working groups kind of come together. We talk about data-driven policing. We talk about the different projects that we're working on. And, every once in a while, we like to throw in conversations that kind of help us build our analysis around what we're studying, what we're working on. So I just want to give a little bit of background of what the data-driven policing group is doing. We have two working groups. We meet the first Monday and the third Mondays of the month. We meet from 6 to 8 p.m. And so normally in this group, you get to kind of find out what we study. On the first Mondays, we work on this kind of concept that we're developing around land and policing. Because initially, the Stop LAPD Spying had a working group that was moving to dismantle predictive policing. Los Angeles Police Department had two predictive policing programs, Laser and Predpol, and we successfully dismantled both of those predictive policing programs. And since then, LAPD has moved on to data-driven policing. So in the land and policing group, we look at the intersections of this type of mapping technology that police use and real estate development, and how police facilitate gentrification and this kind of coordination of real estate owners coming in and actually using the police to develop land, and traditionally, as we know, as gentrification. We found very interesting emails between the city attorney and the police, helping real estate owners come in and actually get police into new developments they have, old developments they have. So we're really trying to look at what that structure looks like and how it ties into data-driven policing. On the third Monday, we actually look at the new predictive policing program, data-informed community-focused policing. And that's kind of the latest iteration of what you could call predictive policing, predictive analytics, data-driven policing. And that working group is really deep diving into looking at location-based policing, which is a component of that, and how mapping is used. Hotspots are used to criminalize spaces. We look at offender-based policing, which is kind of the next iteration of gang databases, how police go after and have lists of people that they deem to be chronic offenders, habitual offenders. And then we also look at how community policing kind of packages up this type of policing and puts on the velvet glove right over the iron fist. So if you're interested in any of that, stay tuned to the whole webinar. Hopefully towards the end, we'll speak a little bit more and show some maps and a little bit about what we're doing. But today we really wanted to kind of dive into why it's so important that we understand what data-driven criminal justice programs are out there, right? Because it's not just policing that uses data, that uses different types of predictive analytics, different types of mapping software. It's involved in a lot of different processes. So I'm going to pass this over to Hamid, who's co-hosting with me today. And we're going to slowly get into our conversation around data-driven prosecution.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome everybody to our webinar part 36. Every Tuesday since March 24th, we've been having a webinar. And today is, as Jamie was saying, we're going to do a deep dive into the world of data-driven stuff, data-driven criminal justice system. And we hear all these terms around artificial intelligence, through predictive analytics, through risk assessment, through machine learning, this, that, and the other. But before we go into that, just want to just talk a little bit about logistics, that while we do have our panel, Paula Minor, Rahman, and John Raphling, in order to maintain the integrity of the space, folks who had come in, their mics have been muted. And we apologize in advance for that. Don't want to police anybody's comments or anything, but we've had a little bit of our share around Zoom bombing. So we just want to make sure that we try and avoid disruption as much as we can. Anytime if folks want to make a comment or have a question, please either type it in chat, or there's a raise hand function in there too, or just on the screen, raise your hand as well, and be happy to open up the mic and have you share your comment, or if you want us to read your question. Similarly, the chat is also limited as well, that your messages will go only to the host. Because again, the chat was weaponized, as we would say, by Zoom bombers for just trying to disrupt and create unnecessary, just diversions. So with that, just really excited about today's conversation, because we've gone through this whole, and we are still continuing the summer of uprisings and rebellions, and a lot of building power on the street. And we've gone through the elections. We saw some major changes happening in the county of Los Angeles, some to our liking, some not. But that's much more, that's a different conversation, but a part of today's conversation as well. But we want to move today into another very critical world of the criminal injustice system, which is the office of, which is a prosecutorial branch, which is the office of the district attorney or the city attorney, depending as to what jurisdictions they have. And many a times that office remains, at least from the mainstream eye, just unless you are in the court system, or unless if you're going through the system, that remains out of the view a lot of times. Because what we have been hearing about predictive policing, and what Jamie was talking about, data-driven policing and predictive analytics, that's on the daily. That's 10,000 LAPD cops are out there just basically just criminalizing and containing and going after folks completely based on pseudoscience, and this whole speculative and hunch-based language. So we're going to do a deep dive in that today, and excited about that conversation. And we also have our dear sister Paula, just a warrior sister, just somebody who inspires a lot of us, and one of our very close partners with the BLM as well. So I'm going to pass it back on to Jamie, who is going to get our conversation going.
Great. Thanks, Hamid. Paula, I wanted to, really ground this conversation. I think a lot of times when we, talk about policing, there's those of us who, the experience of policing, who is on the boot end of policing. We just saw the data come out about stops again. We've just been through that conversation about who is more likely to be stopped, who's more likely to be frisked, who's more likely to be arrested, who more likely is to be on the other end of the use of force. So for me, it's so important when we start these kind of almost like deconstructing conversations, that we really ground why we're here, why we're in the fight. And I think one of the things that was so phenomenal about Black Lives Matter's Los Angeles fight in Los Angeles around the district attorney was the power that was built within the families. So I wanted to, just invite you to take this time with us and just kind of walk us through that fight, what it was like to build with families, what kind of power was built, what kind of knowledge was exchanged, and then also just kind of bringing in, that obviously the fight is not over. And what does BLM see themselves now, seeing that we have a new DA? What does that mean to Black Lives Matters? And again, I really appreciate you being here. I work a lot with you at LAPC Fails, so it's always great to have a conversation with you.
Very good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Hamid. I'm so glad to be on tonight. I just kind of want to, I want to talk about past, present, and future. And it's really, really kind of ironical to talk about it in that way, because Black Lives Matter was just created in 2013, 7 years ago. And so much has occurred in those 7 years, that when you say past, it's not that long ago. But the thing that we're highlighting tonight is our battle to get rid of District Attorney Jackie Lacey. And that is a victory for Black Lives Matter, LA, and the organizations, the coalitions, the families, everyone who joined with us to really help us with that campaign, that battle. So we are, in some sense, kind of celebrating, but in another sense, we're very cautious because we know, although Jackie Lacey was a person who failed Los Angeles County, she was part of a system. She did not create that system, and her leaving does not necessarily change that system. You know, it changes the person who is identified, you know, as the DA. It changes that individual, but the system of criminal justice in Los Angeles County remains the same, and there is unbelievable reform that has to begin. But let me just go back and kind of walk through what happened in our past. Back, as I said, Black Lives Matter was created in 2013. And so as Black Lives Matter was trying to figure out here in Los Angeles, what is going to be our focus? What is going to be our direction? In 2014, of course, Michael Brown was killed in Missouri, and Ezell Ford was murdered by LAPD here in Los Angeles. So a lot of people were unaware of what was going on here in Los Angeles, but the case for Ezell Ford was just as horrendous as all of these officer-involved shootings are. But we rallied around Ezell Ford because he was suffering from mental challenges. He was unarmed. He was simply walking down the street. His family said that his routine, he lived at home with his mother. He was 28 years old, and his routine was they allowed him to walk to the corner store every day and back. Okay, just a very simple task for someone who was having some challenges. LAPD pulled up and decided that the store he wanted to walk to was in an area, in a zone that they were surveilling, and they decided to stop him. The end result of the stop was that he was murdered. So we rallied around that family, and we're trying to figure out, how do we get transparency? How do we figure out what happened? How do we help the family? How do we get information? We were struggling, we were growing, and we started going to the police commission thinking this is the point maybe where you can get some information, where maybe you can get some transparency or accountability. And we discovered it was not necessarily so. So as we continued to do our advocacy and continue to work with families as more and more officer-involved shootings occurred, we ended up, I guess, around 2015 or so, when Brendan Glenn was murdered by LAPD. Again, unarmed, a man at Venice Beach, houseless. And the interesting thing about that particular officer involved murder was the then Chief Beck, recommended to the DA that she should file charges. And this was like amazing because police chiefs never recommend that their officers be prosecuted. And he suggested this to Jackie Lacey, and she ignored it. So that, you know, that was like our eye-opening, like, who is Jackie Lacey? For us, we had to find out, who is he talking about? Who is the DA? What does the DA do? And as we began to do our research, we realized the power that the DA had. We realized how the DA was harming our community, harming our families. We realized that this was a point where we really need to apply some pressure. And we had to do research. We had to study, because we're a group of volunteers. We're not researchers. We're not people, who studied criminal justice. We're people who learned it as we organize, as we interact with our community, as we interact with families. We find out what's going on. We find out what was happening. We found out the DA is one of the most powerful elected positions in your county. The DA is said to have the gate key to the prison system. When we talk about mass incarceration, and we talk about in LA County, the number of people who are incarcerated in California jail systems, we find out the high percentage of Black and brown people in the California prison system that come from LA County, we understand where that begins. That begins with the recommendations, with the prosecution, with the sentencing determinations, with all of the power that the DA has. And Jackie Lacey was a DA who was kind of grew up. You know, her only job from the time that she got out of law school was with DA's office. She spent some 30 years there. She was mentored there. So she kind of grew up in that law and order environment. She started in the 80s, and she carried forward the issue of not necessarily justice, but the issue of punishment. She even said that in one of her campaign speeches. My role is to punish. She never said my role is to seek justice. My role is to punish. So those are the kind of sentences, those are the kind of things she did. So, a light came on with us. We said, oh, this is where we need to be directing our efforts. So one of the family members was a young woman whose twin sister, was murdered by the Inglewood Police Department. And just to let everyone know, in LA County, there are numerous law enforcement agencies, not just the LAPD, not just the LA Sheriff's Department, but there are 40 cities in Los Angeles County and numerous communities. Most of those cities have their own law enforcement, their own police department. So this was the Inglewood Police Department. Jackie Lacey, or the county DA, has jurisdiction over all of those departments in the county of Los Angeles. So that includes cities like Inglewood, as I said, Beverly Hills, Long Beach, Santa Monica, Glendale, West Covina. Just an amazing number of entities were under her jurisdiction, or under the jurisdiction of the DA. So in any case, we were focusing on this particular officer involved shooting in Inglewood. The young woman, Tricia Michaels' twin sister, and a friend of hers were in their car. They fell asleep late at night. They pulled the car over to the curb and they were sleeping. Inglewood police said they were sleeping in the car. Inglewood police said they approached the car and tried to wake them up. The end result of them trying to wake them up is that 5 officers fired bullets into the car, killing both Tricia Michaels' twin sister and the young man that she was with. So we began to do advocacy with that family, and she wanted to know who's responsible, what's going to happen. We know who did it. They even admitted that the individuals were asleep. Their story was, very difficult to understand. The mayor of Inglewood ended up negotiating something with them that was not transparent, but ended up with them leaving the Inglewood police force. So with the support of Tricia Michael and her family, we wanted to find out what Jackie Lacey would do, because it appeared the city of Inglewood felt that someone had to be accountable because they allowed these people to leave or they had them removed. So Jackie Lacey needed to prosecute them. We asked if she would meet with the family. We asked if she would explain what happened. She refused. So with the support of Tricia Michael's family, we developed an online petition to Jackie Lacey, asking her to speak to the families, to tell us what her role is, what she's going to be able to do. We got about 10,000 signatures. We printed them out and decided to deliver them in person with the family, with Tricia Michaels and her family, to the Hall of Justice. Of course, Jackie Lacey refused to allow us to come in. When we went, this was early on, we went in the door. The security at the door said, we'll call and see if she'll allow anybody to come up. Of course, Jackie Lacey said, nobody can come up. So then we said, will someone come and get the petition? She sent someone down. She refused to answer us. So with those families, we decided, you know what, we're just gonna stay here at the Hall of Justice until she answers us. So that began in 2017, and that was the beginning of our 3-year campaign where we came to the Hall of Justice every Wednesday afternoon without fail. Sometimes we had hundreds of people, sometimes we had 6 people, but we were determined that Jackie Lacey would know that she needed to answer to these families. And the very sad thing that was occurring is that as we began to advocate for Tricia Michaels and her family, more and more families lost loved ones to officer-involved shootings. By the end of that campaign from 2017, we looked at the data, and there have been over 600 officer-involved shootings during the time that Jackie Lacey was in office, and she was in office for 8 years. So we had the statistics, and these, as I said, were people who had been murdered by the various police departments and also people who had died in custody. And again, Jackie Lacey had not prosecuted not one. She filed charges against one officer, but no officer was ever prosecuted. I feel like the value of that campaign was we began to educate the community, educate other people about what the DA was doing. When Jackie Lacey ran for office in 2016, she ran unopposed. But by the time she decided to run for office and to get ready for the 2020 campaign, she did, of course, have multiple opponents, and then it dwindled down to one. But the thing that we found out in our community, that people were unaware. Everyday people in all walks of life were unaware of the power. And our role was to share information. Our role was to pull the community together. Our role also was to allow the families of victims to come to that particular building every Wednesday and tell their story, share their story with each other, share their story with the community, share their story with the media, with people who did not know what was going on. And, you know, as a result of that, we pushed Jackie Lacey into a runoff in March, this past March, when Los Angeles County had their primary. And we did not campaign for anyone who was running for DA. We only campaigned against Jackie Lacey. Black Lives Matter does not endorse political candidates. So our focus, our action, our campaign was Jackie Lacey must go. You know, we felt that she had been a failure. We felt that it was basically a reign of terror, a reign of neglect, a reign of harm during those 8 years that she was in that office. And we felt, and with the families who came out and told us what happened, that she needed to go. So basically, she's gone. So and we're you know, we accept that is our victory. And just to let you know, that's past. Present, the new DA elect, who is George Gascon, once Jackie Lacey gave her concession speech, his first public meeting was with Black Lives Matter and 20 of the families who had lost loved ones to officer-involved shootings. He knew that we opened the door for him to come here and run for office. You know, a lot of the media is talking about, well, he's progressive, he's, reformative. No, if we had not decided back in 2016, 2017, that Jackie Lacey must go, there never would have been a way for George Gascon to come here to Los Angeles and do whatever it is that he plans to do. So that's just kind of the history. And of course, now we're in, I guess, we're in kind of a positive relationship with George Gascon's office because he met with the 20 families and with Black Lives Matter. He made a commitment that he would meet regularly with Black Lives Matter and the families. He made a commitment that actually he wrote a public letter during his campaign stating that he's going to reopen 4 of the cases that Jackie Lacey had passed on, that he's going to possibly prosecute those 4 cases. It remains to be seen. We understand what happened, and we understand in this system the system has a DA. While we felt Jackie Lacey had to go, we never said George Gascon should come. He made that decision. We opened the door. We allowed him access. We have to be on guard. We have to be aware. We have to be cautious because there's only so much that he can do, no matter what he says. And depending on the way he leans will determine the outcome of this particular effort or particular action. But are there
like sliding in right here, Mama Paula, because I think this is a great segue. But I just wanted to for Shakir, but I just wanted to uplift some things you said that I want to kind of guide us through, because I've always appreciated the way that you kind of tell story and bring things together that are very, very important. And I think one of the most telling things that you said was how the DA is the gate key to the prison system, right? Really kind of understanding that, but then educating families about who the DA was, lifting up that name, the district attorney, so that it became very apparent to people in LA that they needed to pay attention. But then also this creating a space where families were able to kind of direct attention and understand, who they were up against. And so, and before maybe we get into where, Black Lives Matters is going now, if we could spend a little time, talking about George Gascon and talking about the district attorney and talking about what more we need to learn about him, because we know there's transition teams that are happening right now. We know that there's a lot of groups in Los Angeles that are a part of that transition team. But one thing I wanted to really focus us on right now is that we are, this group particularly studies data-driven policing, right? The data-driven components of the criminal injustice system. And one thing that's not been very public is the data transition team that George Gascon has, brought on board. So, and why is that? I'd like to say my conspiracy theories is because, he's very aware that there was a huge fight in LA against data-driven policing, against data analytics. And so I wanted to turn to Shakir right now and kind of ask you, Shakir, if you could tell us a little bit about Gascon's history in predictive prosecution, and what I kind of also like to say, data-driven prosecution and those kinds of predictive analytics, and a little bit about his history in New York and what was done there, so that we can start to kind of merge all these together. And I really appreciate Mama Paula, you taking the time that you did with us, because I want to also encourage folks that this is going to be a lot of information, and to stick around so that we can really synthesize it all together and kind of understand where our fight is right now. So Shakir.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Mama Paula. I'm going to just pick up and talk about predictive policing and the evolution of that, and what and its evolution into a form of something that prosecutors are starting to do too. Which is something that George Gascon has been a pioneer of in his tenure as the DA in San Francisco, and he's talked about kind of what he's hoping to do with the mandate that he has in Los Angeles, the kind of reform vision that he was elected on. Predictive prosecution is a big part of that, the way he's describing it. But maybe just to back up and just talk about what predictive policing is. I mean, when we talk about predictive policing and kind of data-driven policing, we usually think of it as a practice, primarily run by police. And that's where the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition's fight has mainly been focused, in particular dismantling, the laser program, chronic offender, which included the chronic offender bulletins and their use of PredPol. These are all systems that mine data from arrests. So data that's generated by police every time they're stopping someone or watching someone or making an arrest. All of that is being data mined to identify people and places to target. That's usually done by police, but policing is only kind of the tip of the knife, and prosecutors are just as much a part of that. So are judges. John is going to talk more about kind of pretrial, the role that the judges have with predictive policing, but so are prosecutors. So just in the same way that judges have all this discretion that they use these data tools to to give a veneer of kind of scientific validity to the way that they are exercising their discretion normally, so can prosecutors. As Mama Paula was saying, prosecutors wield enormous discretion and are kind of these gatekeepers of the system. They decide who's going to be charged, how they're going to be charged, what and that very much sets the terms for what someone's going to be sentenced to, who's going to face what kind of convictions. For example, even like the same, like for example, a prosecutor and some reform prosecutors have done this, have said they're no longer going to prosecute marijuana crimes. And so some have done that, and they can just stop doing that. The police can keep making arrests, but they are the gatekeepers of what gets through or not in that way. They also decide affirmatively what to charge people with. For example, if someone, if I'm, arrested for selling marijuana out of my house, prosecutors can also choose, the prosecutors are the ones who are going to choose, am I going to be charged with possession, or am I going to be charged with intent to distribute? Am I going to be charged with trafficking? Are they going to say, my roommate was also in on it, so he's also a co-conspirator? And then is there a conspiracy charge? And, whether there's enough of a conspiracy for it to be federal, all of that is the kind of menu of things that prosecutors choose from. And that's where data-driven prosecution comes in and predictive prosecution comes in. So to talk about that, I want to just use what Gascon has himself described as his plans and what he's worked on in other cities, just because, this isn't like similar to a lot of reform kind of things. This isn't a matter of some kind of secret hidden agenda or some kind of conspiracy that we're uncovering of some dangerous thing that he's working on. It's in the same way that a lot of the things that we're working to dismantle nowadays began as reforms. That's what predictive prosecution is being framed as. It's being framed as part of the reform agenda. So here I have just a screenshot from Gascon's from his campaign page, talking about how one part of his mission is to take the DA's office into the 21st century by implementing a crime strategies unit like he did in San Francisco. And he talks about, a little bit of what that is and how one of it kind of netted the most arrests in a single day for a federal agency, and that's part of what he's going to implement here. And then there's this report called Transformative Justice Prosecution Strategies, which I have here. I feel like, it's like hearing prosecutors take the term transformative justice as to describe what they're doing does feel, uncomfortable, but that's what they're doing. And so, okay, so diving into it. So the crime strategies unit that he's saying he wants to start here is something that he also founded in San Francisco. And so here they're describing it as a unit that uses data and predictive analytics for strategic prosecution and crime prevention. This is kind of a reform document that's on that the DA published. And so, so here you have it. It's preventing crimes, it's predictive analytics, and it's to sort of strategically target people based on this kind of data mining. He also talks about in the same report later on how they created this unit modeled after the crime strategies unit in Manhattan. The Manhattan DA's Cy Vance's same unit, and kind of he was inspired by the success of that to create that here. So we have some hints of what is coming from knowing what he's done in San Francisco, and has talked about kind of what the model is coming out of New York. And I can talk a little bit about that. Before moving to LA, I worked in New York. I worked in the Bronx, and at a time when the Crime Strategies Unit of the Manhattan DA was responsible for these kind of mass prosecutions, mass indictments in a couple across the city, and very much working in conjunction with ICE and with federal prosecutors to build these large cases of saying basically that kind of a community of youth, everybody who lived in a housing complex or everybody who lived kind of in a couple block area, basically a bunch of kids who grew up together, that was their community, that's who they knew, that they were all kind of in this large conspiracy, often using federal racketeering laws and RICO, which is federal kind of very serious racketeering statute, to build up these cases that would take a long time, and they would then suddenly indict like 80, 90 kids, and in the middle of the night, pre-John raids, arrest all of them, and charge them all with, if maybe one of them maybe some of them were involved in, like a couple of the kids might have been involved in selling drugs, so someone else might have had a gun or something. But through all of this kind of data gathering that they'd been doing for a long time on the kids, would say that all of them are in this kind of conspiracy network. And that, when these indictments were unsealed, we'd see that it was all based on kind of social media analysis of data gathering from cases, of data gathering from surveillance, all of the things that was being talked about in those reports that I just read, of this kind of sophisticated analysis of data and data gathered by the system, gathered through surveillance and through arrests, were then used to kind of criminalize an entire neighborhood, an entire group of kids. And I remember, working with those families and talking to some, public defenders who talk about what it would look like in court when these cases came in. I remember one told me that it was like it felt like a school shooting or a bombing or something, because it was just, dozens of families, dozens of parents who all of their children had been arrested that day, and no one knew kind of what was going on. All of a sudden everybody is swept up in these raids, and that kind of, at least in Manhattan, that's the legacy of the Crime Strategies Unit, and that's where it was kind of developed. Just in the development of another kind of connection to Gascon's history is, when that unit was founded in New York, it was founded alongside Bill Bratton was the chief of the NYPD there. Obviously LA knows Bill Bratton as he was chief of police here before Bill de Blasio nominated him in New York. And he described the Crime Strategies Unit as very much like a collaboration between his office and the DA's office. That it was, here I can show, that it was kind of this, it was this extreme collaboration is the language that's used in here, and a seamless web of information sharing between the police and prosecutors. George Gascon, of course, was Bill Bratton's assistant chief when he was when Bratton was chief of the LAPD here. And in that role, he was kind of responsible for a lot of the data analytics work that the department led. He helped implement or pioneered the ComStat #2, which was a data analytics and kind of predictive and data analysis tool that the police use. And this is where I think this is where we're kind of seeing what the role of, as we're talking about, prosecutors are generally, they have this role of gatekeepers. People are coming into the system and they're deciding which cases to move forward on. But what you're seeing in this kind of predictive and really this close collaboration between police and prosecutors is a proactive approach. They talk, and that's part of how it's framed as reform, is that we are predictively, proactively gonna be figuring out who the troublemakers are gonna be in the future, what are the connections, and who knows who, and who kind of, what are the networks that are developing, and we're going to be taking those down in advance. that's I think sort of what's really scary, is that it's this proactive approach. It's no longer just gatekeeping. It's using the immense discretion that prosecutors have to choose who they're going to go after based on data. And of course, it's presented as reform, which shouldn't surprise us, because so many of the things that we work to dismantle began as reform. And I think in particular, one aspect of that, how that framing of reform works, that I just want to, maybe I can end on this, is this is a report by the by DOJ Research Institute, the National Institute of Justice, about kind of the development of predictive policing. Because as I was saying, before Gascon was DA in San Francisco, he was for 30 years an LAPD officer, and then including all the way up to assistant chief of police, and then chief of police in Arizona somewhere, and then chief of police in San Francisco. And he talked about, when he implemented kind of predictive policing technologies in San Francisco, he talked about predictive policing gives us the tools. We have the tools to put cops at the right place at the right time, or bring other services to impact crime. And so we can do so with less. And talking about how it makes the police department more efficient as budgets are reduced. And I think that's kind of a framing we're going to be seeing a lot, especially as there's these as our movements are calling to defund police, especially as budget cuts and revenue shortfalls. Like the city is facing a $600 million revenue shortfall now, and looking where they're going to make cuts. We're going to see this kind of framing of data-driven, proactive, predictive policing as an answer to that, as a reform for making everything more efficient.
Thank you, Shakir. That was definitely very helpful, and I think I appreciate the way you sort of lifted both what Gascon's. I mean, he's a cop. Let's just cut through a lot of stuff. He's a cop through and through. I mean, he's a 30-year cop. He was in LA. He was in Mesa, Arizona, as you said. He was in San Francisco. And the DA's office and the prosecutor's office is an extension of the cop. And of course, just probably one of the most powerful and one of the most violent offices when we talk about mass incarceration, when we talk about racial profiling, when we talk about throwing the book. I mean, that's literally what we are talking about, is the DA's office, who decides that who lives, who dies, who is in, who's out, and everything else. So really having the keys to an individual's and family's futures. So I appreciate that, and thank you, Paula, for really kind of just laying it out, because obviously, the Stop LAPD Spy Coalition's practice and philosophy as well. We were not very present in the Jackie Lacey campaign, because of course we're not into that. But as far as the organizing piece was, I mean, in my own over almost 35 years of organizing, that was one of the most brilliant organizing that I have seen, particularly I think where we always talked about and envisioned, how do families really take the lead when we look at the most impacted, that truly embodied that what organizing is, and how to remain grounded and not shift, right? And to hold the institution accountable. So I'm going to now invite my comrade, my brother, my friend, John, who's John Raphling, who I have so much respect for his work, who's just been a tremendous, and I think talking about embodiment, at least from my experience, somebody who truly embodies community lawyering, somebody who was on the front lines, who's been a public defender, who's been a Fourth Amendment attorney, who's at Human Rights Watch, who's really on the daily, as in Skid Row. I mean, and doing these legal clinics, representing some of our comrades, Debbie Burton, General Dogon, and you name it. So John has a long history in not only in community and people's lawyering, but also building power in the community and really building that family. So John, I know you've also been on the front lines against this whole, this pretrial risk assessments and all of this pseudoscience that we've been talking about. So just take it away and just let's talk about it.
All right. Well, thank you, Hamid, and thanks for the introduction, and thank you, Stop LAPD Spy Coalition, for inviting me to talk. So a couple of things just to go right from what Shakir was saying. Efficiency. predictive analytics in policing, in the court systems, in prosecutions are about efficiency. And when I say efficiency, it's not making do with less, it's about using these tools to increase the power of the incarceration machine. And that's very dangerous. And I also want to add that these tools, by their very logic, automate the process of racial profiling. And so with those two things in mind, I want to tell a quick story about my first ever sort of brush with predictive analytics. And it dates back to the year 2000, when I was a deputy public defender. I was working at the LAX courthouse. And working at the LAX courthouse, we would occasionally get, pretty often, we would get cases of people who would be bringing suitcases filled with marijuana onto the airplane. And they would have these suitcases with like 50 pounds of weed in them, and they would check their bags and hope they didn't get caught. And some of them would get caught, right? This was back in the pre-9/11 days. This was one of the main ways that marijuana was distributed around the country, through LAX airport. So, and what was interesting was that my typical client on those cases would be a youngish Black woman. And it was interesting because, like, well, is that who's smuggling marijuana around? Or is that whose bags they're looking at and catching? So one case I got, she got caught. She checked in her bag and they opened it up and it had a whole bunch of marijuana in it. But we were fighting the case anyway. And we went to preliminary hearing, and during the preliminary hearing, the airport security, and this was before TSA, before the Department of Homeland Security even, but the airport security, I asked him while he was on the witness stand, so he's under oath, I said, hey, why'd you choose to open up this bag or this suitcase? He says, well, I got a computer printout that told me to. Got a computer printout told you to? Well, what did the computer printout say was the reason you were picking the bag? I don't know. I just do what the computer tells me to do. Okay, well, that was pretty interesting. And so the next step on the case was I issued a subpoena to it was US Airlines, I think. I forget. I think it was US Air. I issued a subpoena to them because it was their security people saying, I want the documents that explain why the computer told this guy to search this woman's bag. And so on the day the subpoena was due, these two very high-priced lawyers walk into court saying, the computer program that decided that her bag was to be searched is a top government secret, and you can't have it. And we will fight it with the full force of the US government and our very high-priced lawyers. But they kind of whispered to me, look, we have these profiles that are looking for terrorists, and they predicted that this person was potentially a terrorist. So they said to search the bag. And of course, I was targeting, right, because there's only limited circumstance where they can't search your bag when you get on an airplane, but I was targeting, look, is there some racial bias or some other type of bias within the decision-making? But all I'm getting is they've got this profile. So keep that in mind as we talk a little more technically about how these tools work, because they're all about profiling. And in my work at Human Rights Watch and over the past several years, much of my work has been around looking at pretrial risk assessments. And pretrial risk assessments are essentially computerized programs that decide whether you stay in custody while you're waiting to figure out, while the court is deciding whether you're guilty or not, or whether you get released and get to fight your case from home. And so these pretrial risk assessments work by the same logic as the US Airlines computer. I guess it was actually coming from the Federal Aviation Administration, in that they take some facts about a person, they take data points about an individual person, and they essentially create a profile out of those data points and compare the profile that they've created to 100, 1,000, 100,000 other people who have a similar profile, and decide, well, 30% of the people that you are just like based on our profile didn't come back to court or got a new arrest. Therefore, you're a 30% risk of not coming to court or of getting arrested in the future. Now, a couple of things to understand about these data points. They're taken completely out of context. So a typical data point for the most common, or a data point for the most commonly used risk assessment tool is, have you missed a court date in your past? Well, people miss court dates for a lot of different reasons, right? People miss court dates because they couldn't get childcare that day, and they came in the next day when they were able to get childcare. Or people miss court dates because they left the state so they could avoid prosecution, right? And there's a broad range in between. But the risk assessment tool just looks at, did you miss a court date? And if so, you get scored against the same amount, regardless of the reason. That's kind of dehumanizing, wouldn't you say? That's kind of like, you're not a person, you're a collection of out of context data points. We don't care what actually happened to you. We don't care how old your felony conviction is. We don't care the circumstances behind it. We don't care who you've become. This is a profile that we've made of you. And so these decisions that are, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say these are life and death decisions as to whether someone is going to be held in custody pre-trial, because people in custody pre-trial plead guilty and that ruins their lives, whether they're guilty or not, are being made based on these profiles. Now, can we say anything more about these profiles? Well, let's look at the data that they use. They use things like, well, criminal legal system history, arrest history, missed court dates. Some of them use things like employment history, housing stability. Some of them even use zip code. I'm not aware of any in the pretrial space that specifically use race. But if you're using likelihood of arrest, and I in my white suburban neighborhood can drive around with a car full of guns and drugs, but the police aren't stopping me because they're not even around. Whereas in Black communities, in Latino communities, in poor communities where police are all over and they're stopping everybody, which is a fact, there's going to be a different likelihood of arrest, regardless of whether we're actually committing crimes at the same level or not. All of the factors that these tools use, in some level, are proxies for race or proxies for economic class. And as it turns out, they're very biased relative to age. Young people get rated as higher risk. And so we have profiling that's profiling based on race, class, and age, and probably other things. And these are things even the makers of the tools can't even argue that it's not the case. But the argument from the people, and this is something to understand, and I think Shakir brought it up, or maybe Hamid did. The use of these tools is being sold to us as reform. We're getting rid of money bail. We're replacing it with risk assessment. Well, wait a second, money bail is discriminatory and racially biased, but so is risk assessment. Yeah, but risk assessment is going to get more people out of jail. No, it isn't. Risk assessment is going to get more people out of jail if whoever controls the risk assessment tool wants to get more people out of jail, which Sometimes that's the case, but it's going to put more people in if the people who control the powers that control risk assessment tools want more people in. It's a tool. Like a screwdriver, it can screw you in, it can screw you out. It can put more people in jail when they build more jails. It can get more people out when things are overcrowded. And guess who controls the risk assessment tools 99% of the time? The judges. And the judges know that people in custody plead guilty faster than people who are out of custody. So you can only imagine what the judges are going to do with these risk assessments. Okay, so that's pretrial risk assessment tools. But let me, and I don't want to go too much longer, but the logic by which they operate is the same as predictive policing, particularly what we call person-based predictive policing, where the police are gathering data about an individual and essentially assigning a risk score to that individual. And then they're not making a decision about in or out in the pretrial phase. They're making a decision about how much attention do we give this person and what kind of attention is it? This is a high-risk person, so we're going to go visit them and make threats to them. This is a high-risk person, so we're going to surveil them. We're going to arrest them for little things. We're going to be all over them because we've determined they're a high-risk person, okay? Even though, as understood, it's based on these biased profiles that aren't actually contextual facts about a human being. Predictive prosecution similarly operates on the same logic. And Shakir got into it quite well. I want to add a couple of things, or maybe emphasize a couple of things, because I think he spoke about them. My understanding of predictive prosecution is they're taking it even a step further to where they're gathering, they're monitoring people they've determined are risky, monitoring their social media feeds, monitoring where using various surveillance technology to watch what they're doing, using facial recognition technology to surveil. And this is a really critical piece of it, using it to map relationships among people. And that's, I can't stress how critical that is to the danger of this thing, but also how much this is absolutely no different from what they've been doing for decades. It's just with these incredibly powerful, and as Shakir put it, efficient tools, right? Remember, cops used to run around and they would stop young people and they would write up FI cards, right? Field interview cards. And the field interview card would always say, like, who was this person with? And they use that to map out all these relationships, right? And whenever they go raid a house of a gang member that they're arresting, they find their pictures. I mean, I used to handle these cases and you'd always get the pictures and they would use these pictures. That guy is a known gang member and you're in a picture with him. That's how they're mapping out. Well, now we've got their Instagram, their Facebook, everyone else's Instagram and Facebook, and they're using these powerful facial recognition tools to bring that all together and then pumping that into the algorithms that are developing these risk scores for who they're going to put attention to, and are developing, using it as evidence that they can use to show, well, this person is associated with that person. Therefore, we want to give them more attention. When we say attention in the prosecutorial way, we mean this person gets arrested for some minor crime, but you know what? He's on our high risk list, so we're going to throw the book at him. So instead of charging a petty theft misdemeanor where he'd probably walk with 5 days of community service, we're going to charge it as a commercial burglary and try and get prison time for this person. We're going to seek high bail for this person because they're risky and they're on our target list, so that they're going to sit in custody while their case is being held. We're going to upcharge, I mentioned, And we're not gonna negotiate plea bargains with this person. We're gonna insist on a high sentence for this person. Those are real world consequences. And just a super quick thing, a few years back, cases from Skid Row were showing up in court, and on the arrest report, there was a stamp that said Skid Row on them. And basically the instruction to the judge, or I'm sorry, to the prosecutor was, don't cut deals on these cases because it's a Skid Row case. So this predictive prosecution can be targeted not just at individuals, but at neighborhoods, right? That was a prototypical version of it. Now we're adding all this high-tech stuff. And I can guarantee you this stuff is going to get used in the service of gentrification.
We're seeing that.
I'm going to stop there and leave it at that.
We're seeing that, yeah. So we're going to open it up for folks to make comments, questions, but before we do that, I just wanted to go back to Paula. Paula, what next? And I know that you know, I mean, you were telling me the story that when all the families were speaking with Gascon, the family members put him on notice as well. That, yo, I mean, this ain't no love fest. We're gonna come outside your house as well. So what next? Because obviously, you know, he is so wedded to data-driven prosecution, and then of course that whole dangerous Palantir data processing system as well that is all over the place. So yeah, if you can just briefly just share as to what next with Gascon.
Well, immediately next at 7, I guess it is 7, there is a community meeting at YJC for people to come, primarily organizers to come and help Black Lives Matter develop a list of what our expectations are, a list of what we want to hold Gascon accountable for. You know, and it's open. Certainly, you know, we got information from Stop LAPD Spying, which is, yeah, unbelievable. And that will be part of the information that we're going to share with him. He, as you say, what next? He said, what next? So we're going to tell him what next. These are some of the things that we want you to answer to. These are some of the things that we are asking you to do. These are some of the things that we are expecting you to do. And most of all, we want a response to these demands, and their demands. You know, you know, we learned from dealing with Jackie Lacey, from dealing with these police chiefs, that an ask means nothing. We are demanding, you know. So we're putting together, and if anybody has any information or has any demands that they want to share, they certainly can, you know, Hamid and Jamie, you can give them to them and they'll give them to me, because we are developing a document, and it will be a community document. It's not going to be private. You know, we have told him we're not trying to negotiate with him one-on-one. We're negotiating in the open with the community, with the family's input, with other organizations' input. You know, our effort, although we started it and we tried to hold it together, was a coalition of lots and lots of organizations and lots of interests. You know, because while we focus on officer-involved shootings, there were many people who focused on death sentencing, many people who focused on juvenile incarceration, many people who focused on use of that gang database, as John was kind of talking about, how they use these things to enhance sentences to give people the most harsh penalties that they can. So it is a wide coalition, and yeah, we're not stopping. I mean, you know, we have to keep doing the work, because this is LA County. You know, nearly every week, someone is harmed by law enforcement every week. So yeah, we're moving forward.
Thank you so much, Paula. And of course, like, you know, from the coalition, the message is that he has to publicly reject any use of predictive prosecution or risk assessment based or data-driven prosecution, and absolutely cancel any contracts with Palantirs. So thank you for sharing your time. I know that you've got to be going to be on that call as well. But as
Yeah.
always, lots of love, just thank you so much for being here. So,
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate being on with you. Bye,
much
everyone.
appreciated.
I'm going
Thank
to
you.
leave.
Bye,
Thank
Paula.
Bye-bye. So Jamie, we have a question here too, in the chat. And it could be for Shakir or John, that when the cops stop unhoused people, they fill out these slips and call it making, in quotes, contact. Is this info going into the predictive system? Because the cops ask them their social security numbers and other information.
John, you
John?
probably know a little better about what exactly those contacts are, but I mean, in general, police, like the kind of FI card information, other information that police are collecting are definitely going into this. Well, yeah, so go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically what those are. Those sound like the FI cards that I referred to earlier, little like 3x5 cards that they fill out with all kinds of information, and those definitely are going into databases. And I can't imagine that they would be taking the information if they weren't putting it into databases, given how data-driven LAPD has become. So I don't know for certain, but I can't imagine that they're not.
I would venture to say they would, like, so.
Yeah, and
Back to
no,
you,
and
Jamie.
they're definitely automating that process through a program called Connected Officer Program, which they're automating the field interview cards so that it can update predictive, that various types of social network analysis, crime reporting, real time. So, and that's the goal, is to be able to kind of use these larger systems to be able to update various analytic systems in real time. So yeah.
I actually just want to add one more thing to that, which is it relates to kind of we're talking about what happens when people are getting stopped and what the predictive flags that they're using are. One thing that the crime strategies unit in both San Francisco and New York does is, once the prosecutor's office flags people as these like targets or high priority kind of targets of theirs, every time that person gets arrested by police, it throws up a flag for the prosecutors, and then they know, like John was saying, that, oh, we're going to upcharge this person, we're going to not allow bail on this person, we're going to raise bail on this person. So in that way, it's like they're doing the predictions, and then police are kind of the boots on the ground everywhere, who are, as they're just doing, and not only arrests, also stops. Like, every time they're stopping, like just a vehicle stop or a street stop, which we've been recently seeing, the reporting that the Office of the Inspector General did about how racially discriminatory all those stops are. Those stops then trigger these flags, probably plugged into some of these systems that Jamie just talked about, that then trigger all these consequences through the DA.
Jamie, there's another question in the chat, and Austin wants to know that can LAPD input your data without talking to you?
Quick answer is yep. I mean, where do they get your data? I mean, if you're, have an accessible Facebook account, they can access it just like anyone else, and they will, and they do. A few years back, I represented some people who were protesting right after the non-indictment of the officer who killed Michael Brown. And they arrested something like 300 people, right? It was a mass arrest. And what we learned in the course of the litigation was that they had assigned 20 detectives to sit in a room for like a couple of months with computers, going through every single person's social media, trying to find information that they could use in this case, right? I mean, misdemeanor charges, most of which got dismissed. But what I'm quite sure they were doing beyond that was mapping out all the interrelationships between all the different activists and just keeping that as data that they can use in the future. Now, flash forward 5-6 years now, there's tools that automate that. But so it's vastly more efficient. But yeah, any data that they can get to, they're using.
Is the clarification that the person wanted was that if I'm seen socializing with folks in Skid Row, will my data be uploaded?
Don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, whatever's out in the open, you know, they can, I mean, that's one of the dangers with facial recognition. They could identify you and then, you know, try and look at, get more information about you through using facial recognition technology.
Mm-hmm. Jamie?
I wanted to jump in a little bit because there's so much that what you're speaking about that folks here that are in the data-driven policing groups that's actually unpacking the latest iteration of this kind of predictive analytics that LAPD is using, what's called data-informed community-focused policing. One of the things you spoke about, Shakir and both John, you touched on it, is these lists of people that they create, right? The chronic offender, the habitual offender, the areas that they, you know, call, you know, hot spots or laser zones. They used to call them predpol hotspots. They used to call them laser zones. Now they're neighborhood engagement areas. Now they are location-based policing, right? But the one thing about those places and wanting to bring in the district attorney into this conversation is the relationships with how police are kind of almost structuring their information and their operation in order to make the district attorney's not job, but like what you're saying kind of flow, right? So it only makes sense to me, and I don't want to answer the question while asking it because sometimes I do that, but like if LAPD is already creating an offender-based profile, right, and documenting people that way, and already documenting areas as you know, high crime or, you know, the neighborhood engagement areas, it like, what is this kind of cozy relationship in between, you know, the DA and the city attorney that we should be kind of uncovering more? And I say this because one of the things that we're bringing up, and this is a long question, so maybe it's just contextual, in the land and policing component of the data-driven policing group, is how the city attorney was working to enforce the laser program, right? And so we have emails, the city attorney says like, yes, we're gonna enforce the laser zones. Yes, we're gonna go after the, you know, we'll help you with the chronic offenders. And then you get these emails of the real estate, you know, the real estate kind of developers, you know, saying, oh, hey, there's, you know, something going on by one of my buildings. I need you to send a senior lead officer out there. And senior lead officers were particularly used in LAPD's laser program to go into those hotspots, right? And they were the ones that's supposed to go in there and kind of figure things out. So there's this very cozy relationship with the city attorney getting the data. And so I'm wondering, like, how is that cozy relationship happening between the DA and LAPD, since LAPD is like almost saying, well, we're going to make the list for you. We're going to get the areas for you. And what should we be looking for? And how can we interrupt that relationship? How can we expose that relationship more? Yeah, because we're trying to expose the city attorney and LAPD kind of working hand in hand. And of course, like, you know, the obviousness that the DA kind of is the gateway to prison, but I don't know, I can't help but be like, well, it's like they're, you know, they're kind of both using the same system now and making it very convenient.
Yes. Yeah, it's really, you know, it comes down to this efficiency, right? The prosecutorial arm and the police, rather than being independent, and rather than there's sort of some theoretical idea that a prosecutor would actually have some oversight and be a check on the police, which never actually happens in reality. But now we have them working closely together, more closely together, sharing information. If I can talk about a couple of examples from sort of the past and present that are similar, that I feel like with these new programs are going to be made much worse. So the city attorney has had something called the Neighborhood Prosecutor. And the Neighborhood Prosecutor, you know, there was one in Venice, there's one in Skid Row, who's actually now on his transition team. And the Neighborhood Prosecutor would work very closely with the senior lead officer, right? This is the heart of community policing, right? Would work with the senior lead officer, and they would engage with the community. Now, doesn't that sound great, right? Our public servants are going to engage with the community, except that they're choosing who the community is. If anyone knows Skid Row, the community is Estella Lopez, not Pete White. The community is Estella Lopez being the head. Is she still the head? Used to be the head of the Central City East Association, which was basically a business and real estate association gentrifying Skid Row. And they would work together and they would figure out, well, what are the crime problems in this neighborhood that we, the prosecutor, and our buddies, the police, can help deal with? And most of it was, God, I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who got arrested like 108 times for sleeping on the sidewalk and got prosecuted every single time. You know, so anyway, point being that the this working together of prosecutor, police, and this is part of the Gascon vision of these, what were they called? The safe units. I forget what the phrase was.
The crime, the CSUs?
CSUs, yes, sorry. Is that they're on this neighborhood prosecutor model, where they're all kind of working together and working together with certain elements of the community that they've chosen. And so this is about, well, let's figure out how to most efficiently target certain areas, individuals within those areas. And my fear is, based on what I've seen historically, is it's going to be in support of gentrification, of sort of the rich and powerful. And just a contextual thing that can't be missed is, like, they're looking at, okay, we've got all these data, these factors that lead us to think like there's going to be more crime. Well, what's a bigger factor for crime than poverty? And perhaps we can do something to alleviate poverty instead of just policing it and arresting people and throwing them in jail. Like, anyway, I'll back off of that for a moment. But those are real concerns that you brought up, Jane.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there's a lot that's making me want to talk more about the work that we're doing. Rahman, did you say there was any other questions in the chat right now? Oh, I have a question here with Mike. I didn't. We'll go to Mike and then I'll go back to the question. Mike, you had a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think I'm not answering anything. I think I'm adding another question, and it's, I guess, specifically about Gascon. Hearing this conversation, hearing for the first time about, I guess he has some kind of a relationship with Palantir. I'm wondering, this guy's gone from New York as a DA to San Francisco as a DA to LA as a DA. He's worn other hats as well. He is wanting to use all this technology. Has anyone come across any info about who's funding his campaigns? Does he have connections to some of these big companies and they're funding him and he's just trying to sell their products to the city or something like that? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. It's hard for me to believe that someone could, go from New York to San Francisco to LA without some pretty major backing. I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe the Vance family in New York. They're huge. They're major. They're deep roots in the political power structure in this country. I don't know, just thinking out loud there.
I should say, this is probably due to my what I was saying being unclear. He was, he never, as far as I know, worked in New York. He was the DA. The first place he was DA was San Francisco, and then here. Before that, he was police chief in Mesa and then in San Francisco. But it's the, he cites the Vance's creation of this crime strategies unit in the Manhattan DA's office as what inspired the office in San Francisco.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who's rolling the money, but yeah. I mean, we also have one of our guests from New York as well. I don't know if they're up to they're sharing some thoughts, and so I don't know. Josmar, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate you joining us at this late time. But been hearing, just wanted to see if you're open to sharing some of your thoughts about what's been going on in New York around this predictive prosecution and other stuff with the work that you've been doing out there.
Hey, what's going on, everyone?
Good,
Greetings
good.
from thousands of miles away. Yeah, so my name is Josmar. I live in Manhattan, live in East Harlem, and the stuff with precision policing, I think, is the term that's mostly been used around here. Started in Manhattan with a bunch of gang takedowns in 2011 and 12, and it happened through the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which is headed by Cy Vance Jr., which is what people are talking about in terms of where Gascon may have kind of picked up some of the tricks of the trade. And Manhattan DA's office has a CSU crime strategies unit here, and they boasted about it in a New York Times article in 2014. They called it the Moneyball approach to crime. And then they went off and kind of, tried to pitch it to DAs across the country. And that's kind of what I saw and kind of what I've seen. So Gascon seems like he had some dealings with Vance. Either they had met up at some of these conferences where Vance was pushing this approach through PowerPoint slides and stuff. And my guess is also that Bill Bratton, who was the police commissioner here when a lot of those gang takedowns started to take off, especially ones in West Harlem where you had 103 indictments, and one in the Bronx where they actually brought in federal prosecutors. He really pushed that relationship with the district attorney's office to something called, to what he described as extreme collaboration. So the assistant district attorneys, which were put into Manhattan, was chopped up into 5 areas, and there would be assistant district attorneys that would be tasked with kind of prosecuting all of their serious or what's called priority offenders in those neighborhoods. They would work with NYPD field intelligence officers directly in those precincts, working to build cases, years in the making. I mean, there was not even a whiff of like, we should find out if this person's innocent. It was like innocent first, and let's go fill in the pieces afterwards. So they had that kind of style and approach as early as 2011, 2012. And then when Bratton was here, he kind of helped push it, the public relations part of it, where they gave it a name, precision policing. And the word precision is a military term. It's like precision airstrikes. It also was a direct rebuttal to stop and frisk, to say, like, we're not doing mass dragnet policing, right? That was a mistake. That was a political mistake of the Bloomberg era. And so we're going to do precision, right? Which makes you think that there is some actual detective work happening, and there's something about like getting the correct people behind bars. But what it was is a public relations exercise, but also, you were hitting people with some of the most extreme charges. You were overcharging people. You were using people's associations against one another. You were tracking people through Manhattan's really complex set of public and private cameras, all their movements. It was like full spectrum surveillance from top to bottom. And then on top of it, you had the social media surveillance, which they didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So that really, moved things along. So I guess they realized at some point that this was really good for them, right? Like, because it was precise, and it was about getting gang members, which a lot of people don't usually defend or think that are potentially deserving of human or civil rights. So I think they used the precision policing stuff to kind of rebrand the police right from the beginning. And you know, to me, a lot of this is stuff that's really thought of in the minds of people like Bratton, or at conferences with police and law enforcement officials, where they kind of put their minds together and think, all right, what is the strategy? And I remember reading a few years ago, I think around 2014 and 2015, there was a bunch of police commissioners, and Vance was there with, I think, a bunch of other prosecutors, that they all had like this press conference about like decrying mass incarceration. And it was like this, I forget what it was. It was a press conference or something, but they were like saying like, look, this was right at the very highest point of the first Black Lives Matter explosion in 2014, 2015. So they were saying like, we are police and prosecutors, and we are against mass incarceration. So they decided at least at that time, that mass incarceration was something that they had to publicly distance themselves from. And so precision and all of these things that made it seem like technology was helping them get the correct people was really the way to go. That was the political decision that they made. So distance, get out ahead of the mass incarceration stuff. We can no longer politically make that viable anymore. So let's go all in on this, and let's actually coordinate the police and the prosecutors' efforts to really make these outcomes happen. And what happens is the outcomes they look from the outside looking in, they look good because you have lots of convictions, because people are hit with these charges that many of their defenders and attorneys are telling them, you can't beat this, you should cop out to 10 to not go to to jail for 50. So the conviction rates look high. On the news, you just say 100 gangbangers arrested, and so the public doesn't really care anymore. So it looks efficient, and it doesn't have the nasty side of stop and frisk, where you kind of have this this public perception problem. So I think they made this decision a while ago, and I think Gascon, I mean, it's really interesting because when I looked through his social media stuff, he was singing the praises of Vance and Bratton and all this stuff. I think he represents a really dangerous thing because he's being heralded as a reformer or as a progressive prosecutor. So if the progressives are going to be doing this, I mean, we just got people to realize Bill de Blasio is a bozo, and he's in his second to last year. It took us 7 years for people to kind of realize that. So is it going to take another 7 years for people to realize that Gascon is harming people? And how much damage will he have done in that time? So it's really kind of interesting to hear that this is what a progressive prosecutor is. Vance was calling himself a progressive prosecutor before that term was even being thrown around. And so I think it's really dangerous, but it actually goes in line with, I think, Hamid, Jamie, a lot of the stuff that you guys have been saying for years of reform being like super dangerous and really where the devil is in the details. So I'm kind of not surprised, but I'm really glad you guys are talking about it, because I remember when this stuff was coming out, we had gotten a hold of some of those PowerPoint slides that Vance was pushing. And I was like, I was looking around to lawyers. I was like, holy shit, like, you guys, this is horrifying. I mean, this is like the future in like the most kind of Orwellian terms possible. And I was usually focused on policing, but the prosecution side of this, I was just like, I mean, we don't have enough people. It felt like we didn't have enough people. We didn't have enough eyes on that. So I'm really glad you guys are talking about this, because it really connects a lot to something that's happening here that may have even kind of like really, started off here, or at least kind of got popularized here through what Manhattan District Attorney was able to do, but also to send a signal to people all across the country. Like, when you hear these terms, predictive, precision, I mean, know exactly what you're dealing with. What you're dealing with is kind of the most dangerous form of criminalization, because it sneaks right below the surface, but then it bites you in the ass anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josmar. And I think just the term progressive prosecutor, I mean, you just can't even think that how messed up that term is, that a prosecutor can be progressive. But of course, abolition is being funded as well by foundations. So we know how much fight do we have. So Jamie, but one quick question which I didn't get to ask earlier was in chat is, that is there a way to get your data file? John, Shakir?
I
We
don't.
know, well,
I
go
don't.
ahead. What was that, John?
I said, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I would imagine if it's a sort of an active file that they're looking at, that they're going to really resist like crazy turning it over and say, you know, this is an active investigation. But I don't know. It would be worth trying and pushing. You know, but police dishonesty is legendary. So just expect that whatever you ask for, they'll lie about.
Okay. Shakir, go ahead. You can unmute.
Yeah, and sorry, I got my computer crashed. Yeah, I don't know if that's possible here, especially with, I mean, you know, Public Records Act requests are usually how you try to get this stuff, but there's all these exceptions, obviously, for police files, investigative files. And I remember actually New York, and Josmar, you're part of this, is like the Foil Yourself campaign for people to try to get their gang database file, which is also just, you know, just even see if you're in the database. And you know, I think that could be kind of not a lot of those requests actually produce the records, but just as kind of a like popular ed tool and mobilization tool is to show that, yeah, like, you know, police have all these records and data in the secret file on you that you can't even get, even if it's about yourself. But yeah, whether you can actually get it, I don't know, and in most places that you haven't been able to.
Mm-hmm.
We were at one point, when the Operation Laser, the Predictive Policing Program Operation Laser that identified chronic offenders based on a risk assessment, we were actually going to try to run like a campaign where people attempted to find out if they were on the list, identified as a chronic offender. So it wouldn't be, you know, it's definitely something worth pursuing, just to see at this point in this day and age how much data they do collect on people, and then, you know, how to push that, because we were successful in getting the names of people who were in the chronic offender database. So I mean, it would just be interesting to see, because, you know, essentially officers are the eyes and ears of the federal government now. So it's no longer, you know, like your FBI file, it's your local law enforcement file that they have on you, which they probably have more than what, you know, the FBI technically has. But I don't have any other questions on this end, Hamid. Do you have any?
No, I'm just going to open it up to see if
Yeah.
other folks have any thoughts or any comments. Because I think the other piece also that if folks have some thoughts about what Paula was, when Paula was leaving, talking about, like, you know, if you folks have any demands. I mean, I never place a whole lot of trust ever into like demands. We always got to fight and be out on the street, and, you know, but there are different ways for folks to hold people's feet to the fire. Of course, this is a prosecutor, the most violent and dangerous office, or one of the most ones. But you know, of course, what we have, the message we have for Gascon is that we're not going to let you. It's not going to fly. We will be there, and our comrades and our colleagues and allies and partners at BLM, we've let him know that you know, that he's got to publicly reject the use of risk assessment based and predictive prosecution and data-driven prosecution, and also to cancel all contracts with Palantir, which is central to that too. So I don't know if folks have anything else, that a message that we can send as well, as we're having this conversation. Maybe Josmar, anything out of your experience in New York that you have seen with Cy Vance's, this crime strategies unit, that we may have missed out on?
I mean, the thing with Palantir is really important, because Palantir is you know, one of those brand names of data sucking, right? But I think what's also important to just make sure it's like no third party firms, like not like no one at all, because the role that they play, like the information sharing that they may be doing, you know, apart from whatever happens directly from local law enforcement to federal agencies, right? Like we have no idea. So if it's Palantir today or some other company tomorrow, we just have to make sure, you know, that just that whole entry of a third-party firm being able to have any role in this whatsoever is cut. I mean, just broadly speaking, like there's a Manhattan DA race happening now. So you guys just had that race, but we have the race to replace Cy Vance happening next year, probably in June is the primary. So now you have a whole bunch of candidates. Manhattan DA race is arguably like one of the most visible local prosecutor platforms in the whole country. So there'll be a lot of eyes and ears on this. And, you know, a lot of liberals will be like, they'll care about like the Trump tax returns and stuff like that. But it's important for us as people who are working on things like this to make sure that these issues are put front and center. These candidates will all say like easy stuff like, oh, I won't prosecute, you know, nonviolent stuff, or oh, maybe I'll decrease the penalties for broken window stuff, and that's just low hanging fruit for them. But making sure that we call out all of these infrastructures that they put into place, the intelligence-led prosecution models, the CSU, all of that stuff has to be completely thrown out the window day one for any candidate to have any chance to have, you know, one day in office of peace. Because if those infrastructures are left in place, and Vance spent a lot of time building it, a lot of capital building, I mean, he has a ton of resources. He has probably the most money of any of the prosecutors in the country. If any prosecutor steps in there and they can call themselves progressive or whatever, I don't care what they call themselves, but if they're still using that infrastructure, it is like Vance didn't even leave. And it's not even about Vance. It's just, you might as well have Bratton in there. You might have anyone, because all of these technologies can only be used for harm. So you have to make sure we're telling all the Manhattan DA candidates, you have to promise to day one that program is out the window. In addition to whatever other reforms you want to say, that is a really crucial part of it. Don't do gang conspiracy prosecutions at all, because even if you don't use that infrastructure, you can still prosecute gang conspiracy charges, and it's kind of predicated on the same racialized assumptions and profiling anyway, you know, even if you didn't have all of the technology, you know. So those are the kinds of things I think you need to push to beat back this idea that, you know, we just need to elect guys or we elect people who say progressive sounding things and sound bites, that they need to know that if they want to, they can be progressive, but we as a movement have to be aggressive on them at all times.
Absolutely. One thing, Jamie, so as a proposal for today, also maybe what we could do is that after, with all the information that is being shared, we should, from the coalition's vantage point, put together a document and publicly put out these demands, because, you know, we're not going to do any backdoor negotiation. We're not going to have any backroom meetings. I mean, this is holding him accountable is public. And just to put a list of clear demands and a warning that, you know, this is going to go. So I don't know how you feel, and there's a question as well, but you were going to say something?
Yeah, you know, I was going to say, I think one of the really important things is demonstrating to people, like, there's no way that, you know, he can be progressive if he's bringing in a kind of predictive prosecution model that is modeling exactly the type of data-driven policing LAPD is using, where when we exposed Laser and we exposed PredPol, they were arbitrarily just targeting and swooping people up and keeping people on lists. I mean, there's just so much work the coalition is doing where we're finding out what happened in these spaces, from finding out what happened in the laser zones, finding out stories around gentrification, finding out stories of abuse. It's the same thing that's happening. So I think I agree with that, but I would almost want to take it a step further to say, like, you are the police. You are shaping your office in the same way the police map us. You are targeting people, you are targeting spaces, you are setting it up so that there's a certain amount of data that are, you know, ultimately criminalizing someone before, you know, there's even, you know, you want to talk about a fair trial, you want to go through these whole things where you really have lists and people are already identified. And so, and the thing is that what's so interesting is that with LAPD, the monitoring of people that they are after are people who have already been incarcerated, whether they've been in jail, whether they've been in prison, or they're on community supervision. Those are the people. So when we talk about a movement that's trying to protect people who are coming out of jail, and now we are making partnerships with the people who are targeting those people specifically. Because once you are in the hands of the state, they want you back in, and it's almost like they never let you go. So I kind of would like, yeah, here are our demands, but like, here are we exposing you? Like,
Right,
let's just
right.
full on expose
Absolutely.
who you are. And then, then yes, we'll have our demands, but let's not have the fairy tale either. So I really appreciate that piece because it's just listening more about predictive prosecution. It just felt like I was speaking about data-driven policing. Like
Right.
there just didn't seem to be anything different to it. And the way it's showing up, in LA is, the pseudoscience, and they dropped the precision policing. They really tried to bring that here, but the word salad and the judoism with getting judo around language is they realized they needed something scientific. So they needed to have it data driven so that the data is doing this and the data, showing them all this stuff. And the massive amounts of infrastructure that just keeps piling on, that's allowing, all this kind of surveillance and information gathering to exist, is coming down into neighborhoods now, where, we talk about prisons in neighborhoods. Now they're having like mini fusion centers in neighborhoods. So really showing that street to prison pipeline is so important in exposing Gascon on that level.
Great.
And
Got a question here, and maybe John, I can point it to you because you talked about your days as in the DA's office. Any thoughts on using algorithm for good in prosecution, specifically the algorithm used to identify old drug convictions to expunge?
So first of all, my days in the DA's office.
No, maybe the PD's office, I mean.
Like, don't do that.
Sorry, just
John's gonna have eggs on his car.
I could see, like, oh my gosh, John. Him.
Yeah, no, not in the DA's office.
It's one of those moments seeing a white man turn red. So
yeah, I mean, look, there's all kinds of theoretical ways that you could use these, that you could use algorithms for positive things, for efficiency tools. But the issue is you're building a dangerous infrastructure because 99% of the uses are bad. And, to identify convictions to expunge, I'd rather do that by hand than risk identifying convictions that we're going to use against people in the future, which is what they're really going to do. And that gets to the way a lot of this is sold, and Shakir also talked about this. It's like it's reform, right? I mean, if you look at Hamid put in the chat, the donors to Gascon, they're all like big liberals. They're all people who believe in criminal legal system reform and are sold on this idea that this data-driven, evidence-based stuff is reform. And that's been a massive battle in recent years to push back against that and to say, you actually have to understand what these things do and how they work. And particularly, and this is something that Hamid and Jamie have really been elevating, how they fit within the history of these repressive institutions, police, district attorney, courts. They're not just appearing out of nowhere. They're the latest iteration of what we've been dealing with over time. And, unfortunately, the reformers are sort of looking at it like, oh, look at this nice new toy. This will be good. It's evidence-based, right? If I ever see the word evidence-based, I know immediately to reject it. But anyway, so that's been a real battle. And so getting back to the question, yeah, you can always conceptualize a positive use for these things. I mean, they're selling facial recognition because it's going to find Alzheimer's patients who get lost. Okay, yeah, like 3 or 4 of them. And it's also going to put us under nonstop surveillance all the time, balancing that, right? So I worry about kind of well, what about these positive uses? Couldn't we just regulate the negative uses, right? No, because police are unregulatable. But anyway, yeah, so that's my concern with it.
Yeah, I think it also,
think-
I mean, it
oh.
also, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Hamid. I wanted to jump in with that too, because I think when we talk about the positive uses of algorithms or any kind of like surveillance technology, we have to realize too that, you know, they're keen to people, the idea of decarceration and being against mass incarceration. So they are, and in like, when, you know, you spend time reading these kinds of like policing literature and stuff, they kind of like, okay, you know, we tested and we did all these studies around people who received social services when they came out of prison, and it didn't do anything. So now we're going to couple that with, you know, giving them social services but putting them on an offender-based list, because they're still going back to jail if we give them social services. Our studies have said that, right? You know, we give them housing, we give them employment, they're still coming back to jail. So we can't just give them social services and let them offend all the time. We have to put them on a list also. So when you put someone on a list, there's a way that you have to monitor them. Are you monitoring them by, you know, creating a most wanted poster? Are you monitoring them and having some kind of risk assessment because they've been in parole or probation, or what kind of offense they had? Are you putting an electronic monitor on them? So we have to realize how they're going to dangle social services, housing, you know, this kind of investment with this kind of offender-based, you know, the worst of the worst that we're gonna monitor. That way we can safely decarcerate, right? And so I think that's why we have to come out the gates right away, that any type of like, we have to come out the gates that it's not working because it was never meant to work.
Right.
It's not working because it's a failure, because it's a system that's built on white supremacy. And we can't, you know, just try to find ways to fix it. We have to really start calling it what it is. And then all the tools that come from it are just trying to kind of reassert that power and make that power, you know, more comfortable for people to, that aren't being necessarily targeted, for them to go, okay, well, if you attach some social services, if they get decarcerated, you just have to wear electronic monitor or be on a list, and have cops just beat down on their doors all the time and wonder what they do. Well, you know, it's not as bad as being in a cage. So I think we have to be very careful with how we, you know, what we stand for and what we allow.
Right, absolutely. Go ahead, Shakir.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you know, I think even like saying that it isn't working or why isn't it working, I think the system is working. It's doing what it's supposed to do, which is to enforce this racial order, to enforce kind of the class order. It's to enforce the system's hierarchy. And so even when we talk about these, like, you know, like these big crime strategies units, prosecutions, like as John was saying, these tools are just making what the system is always supposed to do more efficient. So back in the day, the way you would criminalize a whole crew of kids or a whole, you know, neighborhood of people who knew each other is you would just, you know, brutally round everyone up and throw them in jail. Now, the tools allow them to do that exact thing that they've always done in a more efficient, clean, reformy, kind of clean looking way of, oh, we actually gathered all this social media analysis and whatever. And so now we can say that all of these people are a dangerous unit, even though, again, all that you're doing is you're criminalizing those relationships. You're criminalizing that community in the same exact way that the system did before, but now this is another tool for it. So even like thinking like, yeah, I mean, another way to think about those gang indictments and all that is, oh, it's like, it's unfair that all of these people were swept up who didn't do anything, or some of them were innocent and some of them weren't. And it's over prosecuting, or it's over incarcerating. It's not precise enough. But no, the point is it's doing what the system has always done. It's just doing it with new tools that make it cheaper and more expansive.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think as the narrative of the coalition has been that it's not about public safety, it's the intent to cause harm. And that's it's in the service of that whole operation as well. Any other comments or questions from folks who haven't spoken? Any message for Gascon? Cool. So, okay, well, we're coming close. So Jamie, it's 7:53. We can make towards the end a couple announcements, but Josmar, go ahead. Were you gonna make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing is really important with these prosecutions is that actually, when they do go to trial, go to the trial, watch what happens in the trial. They do not want most of these people to go to trial, right? The The system works when everybody cops to a plea deal because they're in a complex conspiracy indictment. When they do go to the trial, it's really revealing. The data that all of this veneer about data and we're using all this technology. I was at a trial for someone who was at the top of an indictment under Vance for the biggest gang takedown in the history of New York City at the time. He was at the top of the indictment. I went to the trial for 6 weeks. The time when they brought in the Palantir information, it was very brief and it was garbage. They brought in a person who specialized with Palantir to say, okay, you've been looking at this person's social media. On the day of the murder, because this person was accused of a murder, there was no physical evidence. How many times a day did he post that day? And how many times did he post the next day? And all that person had was the Palantir printout of how many times he posted. If he posted many times, more than the average times, it's because he's nervous. Oh, he's thinking about something. He's nervous of being caught. And then the next day when he did, if he didn't post enough, it was, oh, he's hiding something. He's laying low. So the data that they bring in when you go to the trial is garbage. The trials are just the trials that they've always done, which is building a lot of doubt in people's minds, and conspiracy allows them to not have to prove the acts, but just prove the conspiracy. And what they do is they go in there and they just dirty up your image in front of the jury and try to get the jury to believe that you're probably in a gang and probably or maybe did it. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. The Palantir stuff is just, at least in this trial, was just used to be able for them to be able to say, like, look at what our computers are telling us. And the interpretation was totally classic prosecutor garbage, which is just like, oh, he's it's like if I got pulled over for driving too fast over the speed limit or too slow over the speed limit. It's just prosecutors doing what they've always doing and just trying to make people believe the worst about you. But the Palantir data itself, it's an overstatement to even call it data because it's garbage.
Thank you for that reminder.
So I think we're wrapping up, and I do want to put a pitch out for the working groups. So like I said, on the first Monday of the month, we're looking at and John touched on this a little bit, on the correlations between data-driven policing and gentrification. We actually have laser zone maps where we have remapped 77th Division and have identified a laser zone area where the city attorney is speaking to the real estate person, is speaking to the senior lead officer. The city attorney is speaking to LAPD, saying, yes, we're going to enforce these zones. There is high like mass displacement based on an LA index that we're seeing that are around the laser zones. And more interestingly, the city attorney, the citywide nuisance abatement division of the city attorney was going to take a field trip to the largest fusion center in the nation in Norwalk, the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. So we're trying to uncover is why is our citywide nuisance abatement, department or of the city attorney going to the fusion center, right? And we have a bunch of our reasonings why, but that crew is looking at 77th Division, and we're also looking at Central Division and looking at how the business improvement districts were helping LAPD, or LAPD was using data from the business improvement districts to create its micro hotspots, areas that it was targeting. So we are looking at how private security is coming in and that kind of data sharing, kind of cooperation in targeting these micro hotspots in Central Division, which we're primarily focusing in the area of Skid Row, where every micro hotspot is is next to a single room occupancy center, right? So they're sending more police there to swoop people up. And notably, one of the places that's in Skid Row that is an anchor point is where they want to put the next luxury high rise, right? So we're uncovering that. That's Mondays, 6 to 8 p.m., the first Monday of the month. And the second Monday of the month, we're digging into, again,
third Monday.
Oh, sorry, third. I want everybody to meet on every Monday. The third Monday, so the first is land and policing. The third Monday is data-informed community-focused policing. So that is LAPD's current data-driven precision policing, predictive policing hoopla that they are running in the city. And there we're looking at, just like we were talking about with predictive prosecution, the offender-based lists, right? The mapping of the community sentiment. They have sentiment mapping where they're mapping whether you like them or not. They have the neighborhood engagement areas where they're sending the senior lead officers to find out more information and figure out how to change the area and intervene. They're setting up their area crime, community crime intelligence centers per division. So these like little mini fusion centers. And they're integrating, community policing and all to this. So we are unpacking what this means. And our biggest first goal is just getting this out to the community in a simple image, a zine. So if you're creative, you love art, if you love to write and or just to think, come sit with us as we not only dive deeper into what these programs are and make these relationships to how they relate to the district attorney, how they relate to the city attorney. Come and be a part of that team. And there's a lot that the coalition is doing, but of course, we'd love to have you at any meeting. So again, just email stoplapdspying@gmail.com if you want to find out more information about data-driven policing and the working groups we're in. And every Tuesday we have a webinar. The next webinar will be the first Tuesday of the month, and it will be our the intersections of gender and sexuality and surveillance. And that will be December, is it? December 1st. Yeah, so December 1st at 6 p.m. We'll be back here. Hamid, do you have any other announcements?
No, I just want to thank John and Shakir and Josmar and Paula for really kind of just guiding us and sharing a lot of knowledge and wisdom and experiences and just being a part of this journey that we're all on. And also want to honor folks who are also part of the data-driven working groups, Brian, Julia G, and various other folks as well. So great to have everybody here. Join us next Tuesday at 6 o'clock, which will be right here, December 1, the intersection of gender and sexuality and the police state. And just keep an eye out for as we start publicly and start mainstreaming and popularizing basic exposing Gascon for who he is and join the fight. So thank you all very much. Be healthy and be safe and have a great night. Thank you.
Good night.